part-time, right? So that's about half of the room are practitioners. Can I get an idea? I know Surin and Dr. Ahmad, I know where you're from. Where is everybody else from? Where are you from? Yeah, no, just behind you, sorry. I know where you are. From Nusantara, okay, okay, great. At the back, I saw another hand up from a conservation practitioner. Wilma, okay, great. I know Benny is from Wilma, I'm not sure where he is. Great, great, great. So just to get a feel, this is basically an introduction to some of our best practices that is currently on the cutting edge of restoration to prioritize biodiversity and also carbon as well. Hi. And thank you all for coming. So my name is Zaiman Zulkifli. I'm from Tropical Rainforest Conservation and Research Center, TRCRC. We are predominantly a restoration practitioner organization focusing on connecting habitats, restoring degraded lands, safeguarding endangered species. Yeah. So why conserve forests? So for those that are working in the conservation, you probably know why we need to conserve forests. For those who are not in the conservation world, basically a lot of people depend on forests for all the services it provides, not only for the businesses, for carbon capture, for example, but also for food, for mitigating climate change effects such as flooding and drought events, and ensuring that the climate is stable. So we have many, many different kind of practices. And it's according to the United Nations Economic Commissions for Europe, about 1.6 billion people around the world depend on it for their livelihoods. So that's quite a large amount, right? Anybody here have durians, for example, over the last few months? They come from the forest, you know. Forests provide essential services not only for rural communities, but also international trade as well. So Malaysia is more further dependent quite a lot on some of the forest exports. And in the past also, materials such as timber, for example, has been produced out of that. So why is restoration such a big theme right now, especially to the banks, to the businesses, to the global kind of big emitters? Forest is a big deal because of its capacity to absorb and retain carbon from the atmosphere, right? Right now, the only technology that is proven is basically from the millions of years the forest has been basically surviving, is how, like you see out here, it does it for free without us having to put in much effort into it and allowing it to just regenerate. So forests can regenerate, and roughly about half a dry weight of a tree basically is carbon, right? If you remove water and all that, about half a dry weight of tree is carbon. So if you can see, out of all the natural processes, forests play a major role. So forest is up there, reforestation is up there, avoided forest conversion, which is moving from forested areas to not forested areas, natural forest management, improvement of that, and also improvements of plantation, be it timber plantations, for example, and avoided fuel wood. So we move away from fuel wood and use other materials. So these are all the about 8 billion tons of CO2 mitigation can come from reforestation and responsible forest management. And where is it important? So it's very important to see that it is really in the tropical belt, which has the highest potential, right? That's where, you know, the Congo is, Malaysia, we're a very small part, South America is as well, but it's in the global south, which is a very important area where most of the inequalities and whatnot happen. So that's where, most of the timber is being exploited. That's where most of the potential is for this. But as you know, forest is a sink. Yeah, forest absorbs carbon. It's regenerating forest that is a sink. But at the same time, with the adverse changes in the climate that we are seeing today, forest can also be a source. So what's happening is you're degrading the forest to a stage where it's not able then to mitigate and survive off some of these major changes. And what happens is it's going to become a net emitter. So for example, the major fires that happened in 2014, if anybody remembers the major haze, that major haze that occurred in this region was accountable for about the entire emissions of carbon dioxide of the country of Germany. That is the entire emissions of transportation, industrial production, and all these materials. So that's a lot of carbon emitted just from 2 months of drought in this region. And that is set to increase, right? So our weather patterns is determined a lot by ocean temperature in this area. And in Southeast Asia, everybody knows the monsoon period, but El Nino and La Nina is becoming more and more frequent. So rather than seeing a kind of a 50-year period of drought, what's happening is it's becoming shorter and shorter. And we see that with the increase in rainfall, increase in flooding, increase in drought periods. So this uncertainty is very scary, and it's very scary for me as a biologist because we depend on the trees to have these natural cycles to be able to produce fruit. If this happens more frequently, the establishment of the next generation of trees could be at stake with this sort of major issues. And so this map is basically from the NOAA, just showing the different movements of the El Nino depending on what's happening. So if it's a La Nina on our side, it means it's going to be wet. If it's El Nino, it's going to be dry. And then the opposite happens across the Pacific Ocean in California. So California, we see major droughts. So the last, I would say, since 2020 to 2024, it's been wet the whole time. Yeah, and only now it's now been a little bit dry, and it's a bit extremely dry. So what's going to happen is extreme wet and extreme dry. And what's important is that our forest basically holds a lot of secrets. So this is a study done by my professor in Oxford University, and he found out that basically the secret to success is diversity. Yeah, if we're gonna have a diverse range of species, all the different species will have different traits, and those different traits will then be able to withstand different sort of extremes, right? So if one species, for example, may be able to tolerate drought, one species, for example, will be able to tolerate intense rain. And so with that, it's almost like an insurance effect, that the forest as a whole will be able to basically withstand these extremes. So who can give me an example of how many tree species there are in a single hectare? For the conservation guys as well, you can contribute. Here, in a single hectare here. So we have a 50-hectare plot, big projects all around Malaysia, and we're looking at close to about 250 to 350 species of woody plants. Out of those 350, there's about 3,000 individuals of different sizes, right? So bear that in mind, that diversity is driving our resilience of our forests. So all those different species have extremely different lifestyles, have extremely different kind of characteristics that can withstand that. But what's happening is basically we're doing a lot of different restoration initiatives, different planting programs that are not taking these facts into consideration, right? You're planting trees and counting the number of trees you plant and the carbon that you absorb, but what you're not doing is ensuring that in the future, some of these trees will be able to survive or not. So that's the most worrying thing, yeah? So at TRCRC, as I mentioned, we are here to conserve and preserve. We also like to spread awareness, such as events like this, public outreach, and develop sustainable development and management plans for Malaysia. We're Malaysian-based. We formed in 2012, but at the moment, we're working regionally as well, so throughout the ASEAN area. But we try to focus as much in Malaysia. So our goal is pretty much for the next 5 to 10 years is to develop these conservation hubs all across Malaysia. And these conservation hubs are basically center of excellence where you can then be able to learn, to be able to develop your skills, and then have the correct planting materials for developing restoration plans all across Malaysia. And we started this about 12 years ago when no one was talking about planting trees. Well, not no one, some people were, but it was not in the main agenda. And the important part is how we have to work across different agencies, right? So at the federal agencies, we have all the nice policies in place, but at the state agencies, that's where it's all implemented. How do you then entice state agencies to basically take on this? And the private companies, like some of you over here, how do you then be part of this picture and contribute towards it? And the other NGOs out there, we understand that not every NGO is focused on restoration, but we're here to basically assist and help out with different NGOs, and that's what we're doing across the board. So our projects are in Sabah, in Aman Jaya, and more recently in the urban context in Selangor as well. So I'll quickly glance over this and get into some of the more details. And the concept of it is basically, it's a collection of rare stands of endangered trees, or trees that are threatened, but it needs to be genetically representative. So all of these conservation hubs are gathering all the endangered trees that we can in an ex situ manner, conserving them in our sites, and developing them as almost living seed banks. And within 10 to 15 years, they can also start to reproduce. Like we've seen in Dato Henry Barlow, who is over here, who has planted a lot of diplocarbs a while back. His trees are already starting to fruit, and those trees can then be future forest restoration materials across Malaysia. For example, some of the species that we have around here is also extinct now in the wild, and also very hard because their population is no longer viable, right? So the idea is then to create these sort of hubs which can be done. So going back to the policies, right? We have many different policies in place. So we have a national diversity policy. We have a central forest plan, which is connectivity policy. We have a plant policy, and we also have a red list. But what is often the issue, I think the national biodiversity policy is updated, if I'm not mistaken. But the issues are, these policies are all happening in silos, right? When you develop a strategy, when you develop a plan, you're talking about only one initiative, one plan, and one strategy, executed from budgets that are coming from one department and not throughout the whole area. These can be cutting across many different sectors, and this is what we're trying to kind of promote to the different ministries and the different government agencies that we work with. So internationally, we have a lot of good intentions. You know, the Bond Challenge calculates how many trees we can plant, right? But unfortunately, they're not subject to a proper selection. It's just basically a number that they want to achieve, and often enough, those numbers is at the most lowest cost, so that you can restore the fastest. And a lot of times, it's also reduces the net capture of carbon dioxide, which I will slowly explain in the next one. But mega planting pledges also exist in Malaysia. Is there anybody from the Malaysian government here? Okay, is this being recorded? Okay, it might be. Okay, so, but these are campaigns and news articles that are in the public sphere. You can have a look at it. Kelantan took the lead in 100 million tree planting campaign, but they were also one of the highest states of deforestation. So what's going on there, right? How is this possible? Basically, they're taking away natural forests and planting trees and saying they have planted trees. And that has a major negative effect, because you're basically taking away forests that are already maybe regenerating, not productive in terms of productivity, but then you're also then achieving and winning in this race to plant 100 million trees. And unfortunately, the 100 million trees that they were on didn't really matter if they were native, didn't really matter if there are any kind of sub-attributes to conservation. Basically, all it matters that they were a woody plant. As long as you're a woody plant, a rose, an exotic rubber tree, all can be planted, right? So these are some of the negative effects of some of these things, which led our current minister, Nick Nazmi, who was here yesterday, to question this in Parliament. So that was quite interesting. So, which leads us to then, how do we simplify it? How do we get this plan out there for everybody to carry out in the most simplest and easiest way to understand? So therefore, we basically, together with a bunch of partners across the globe, developed the Global Biodiversity Standard, which we're going to launch next month in Cali in Colombia, in COP16, Biodiversity COP. Yeah, I hope this works. This is a short video, about 2 minutes long.
We are in the midst of a global crisis.
Half of all species on Earth are extinct.
Humanity has become a weapon of mass extinction.
Solutions implemented often do not benefit biodiversity, with some initiatives actively harming native biodiversity. There is no standard that recognises biodiverse projects. We're changing that. The Global Biodiversity Standard provides assurance that tree planting, habitat restoration, and agroforestry practices are protecting, restoring, and enhancing biodiversity. It is an international initiative that provides a benchmark for nature-based solutions, aiming to shift best practices and support the goals of the Global Biodiversity Framework. Developed by a global community of experts, the standard works by conducting surveys and scoring applicants against 8 criteria. It provides recognition of positive impacts on biodiversity, incentives, and knowledge to improve and promote best practice. Ongoing mentoring from restoration experts helps projects to continually improve their impacts. Together, we will improve the quality of tree planting, land management, and ecosystem restoration projects, helping to promote, protect, and enhance a more biodiverse and climate-resilient natural world for us all.
So yeah, it's kind of shocking. When I first embarked on this, I didn't expect to have to do this sort of work. But there is a sense that there are unsustainable tree planting programs, you know. So that is quite shockingly. Not all tree planting is sustainable. If you're cutting natural forests and replacing it with monocrops, that's not sustainable. So therefore, we had to do this because the scale of which how do you say, restoration practices were not being managed properly, had to be kind of developed so that everybody can play a role. Do you have any questions so far from then till now of what I've been talking about? Please feel free to interrupt me, because we want to have it as fluent and as not a lecture. We want to have it as it's called a workshop, right? So we need to have basically some sort of interaction. Yes. Yep.
We're in
I don't know how to click the next slide. Sorry, go on.
And then the trees get more, they become more resilient to like drought because it's more biodiversity involved. How do you ensure that they gain those traits?
Yeah.
Or do you just let it run its course and they adapt to the current climate?
Yeah. Okay. For good question. How do you plan for adaptation, right? So one of the ways, let's say, for example, we're doing, I mean, in the world right now is being done is, for example, in North America, where they are actually planting species from the warmer regions to the cooler regions. So because they have a big, how do you say, big level of elevation, not elevation, but latitude gains. Where else in the tropics here, we cannot select for many things. We are right the most diverse area. If we're going to select these species from the more drought-resistant areas and bring them down, it's going to be introducing new species. So what is done is looked into kind of species that are adapted to slopes. So in slopes, they're a bit more well-drained, and in slopey areas, you can actually get species that are more drought resilient, whereas from the lowland areas, the species are a little bit more kind of wettish, right? So you can specifically select those, but that's very dangerous, right? If you're going to be selecting species from those different regions and putting them there, what if it suddenly becomes so wet that the species then die out, right? Which is happening right now. The wet is becoming really wet for like the last 4 years, and the drought is becoming really dry. The best practice is basically to diversify as much as possible and recreate what is naturally there. And then some species will die out, some species will survive, but the natural adaptability of that will still be kind of your best guess. Yeah, we're not there at the stage yet when it's all doom and gloom. You can still select some stuff. Yeah, good question. Yeah, so please feel free to stop me anytime. Yes.
Thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
I think from a finance perspective, it's been a challenge when you see, putting in money for conservation. We've seen some mechanisms in place like carbon credits, and they face their own challenges. What are kind of some mechanisms that you see put in place within the region to actually work for the long term, right? Not just for short term kind of CSR work, but more longer term conservation.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it needs to be a combination of things. So when you talk about carbon, you're comparing carbon in an open market, which is competing against things that is just focused on carbon, right? So if you compare like a very less diverse ecosystem that you can plant and pack up with a lot more species of trees, that ecosystem then can have gain more amount of carbon in such a shorter term space. Whereas our system is a bit slower, but in the longer term, it holds more. So you need to then calculate the differences of your value for biodiversity. You need to have increased. You need to have a market for biodiversity as well. So biodiversity credits are now emerging. You also need to have also kind of services providing that forest provides, ecosystem service provides, water and all that kind of thing, slope retention, landslide retention, and all that kind of things. So you need to kind of mix it up. You cannot just go for just carbon. If you go for that, then basically you're competing with, like, especially in the sphere where you can use you can buy carbon credits from solar panel offsetting programs like that. That's hard. That's just adding a little icing on their profits, right? It's not really going into benefiting all of these other services. So the mechanism needs to be able to benefit all of these other services, and that needs to have a value. Yeah, if we do not value that, or if it's not charged properly, then that's going to be a big issue. Yeah. Not yet. There have been talks about it and how it's going to be included in some of these calculations, but I have not yet seen it to go. For us, at the moment, at the scale that we're working on, it's far more easier to go for a species-to-species kind of fund to go and develop some of these restoration programs for the tigers, for example, the elephants, for example, and that is more dollars per hectare that we can actually spend if you're going to compare with this thing. Because in our forests, we're talking about close to about $75 to about $100 per ton to restore some of this diversity of this level. If it's going to be any lower, there's no point doing it. Yeah, avoided deforestation programs maybe yes, but not restoration. Yeah, I think I had another question. Yeah. Yeah. So for example, the projects that we work on, those are very, very specific on preservation of genetic materials for those different species. So it's happening in the most degraded sites in a very small constraint. So we're not doing it in the masses. So when it comes to actual restoration, we're actually going to be sourcing from the most closest, the most relevant spot that you can source. And some of the standards that we're working on right here takes those into consideration. It takes the reference forest and where your seeds are coming from and the distances from that. So we're working on a lot of different tools as well with Biodiversity International that we're going to launch at the end of this month, hopefully, to basically assist practitioners, assist restoration companies to basically be able to gain materials from as close as possible. So it's an online app that will help sourcing of seeds and stuff and assist communities. So that's coming up soon. Yeah, good. But yeah, good question. It's very scary, right? Yeah. Okay, so if there's no other further questions, I'm just going to carry on with this, if that's okay. Let's check our time. It's about 4:26. I have about 15 minutes. Let's see how I can do. So we're definitely on track to 2.6 degrees by 2100, right? And what's happening is that this challenge is a dual challenge, right? The climate crisis and the biodiversity crisis go in hand. And it's very important that we're working on this together because it's not going to be separate. So remember the problems that I spoke about earlier on about how the different ministries and how the different departments are all not working together. This also will have an issue if all the different kind of camps are not working together. You got the climate camp, and then you have the biodiversity camp, and they're not talking and working together. So this is a issue that can cut across the globe, actually, if it's not planned properly. Yeah. So most recently, some of my colleagues published this paper on the 10 golden rules for restoration. It's a little bit small, but the article's there. You can look it up. But in general, it gives you, before you plant and before you restore, some general rules. So the first rule is basically, don't even plant yet. Protect existing forests. That's the best strategy. What we're doing right now at TRCRC, this is almost like the most last strategy, right? It's almost the Noah's Ark approach. Let's try to save as much as possible in the most smallest amount of space and then hope for the best, right? But we need to also then work together, right? Like we have here a nice group of multi-disciplinary practitioners, and it's really great to see that this topic is becoming very, very much mainstreamed, right? So that's very important. So the third option is aim to maximize biodiversity and recovery to meet multiple goals. So like we mentioned, there's not one goal. This can meet different goals. So how can we meet all of these goals at the same time and account for it, you know? Number 4 is select appropriate areas for restoration. It's very important. If you look around, there's a lot of different areas that have already tree cover, but not necessarily the correct species mix. So a lot of times, what we're talking about is basically enrichment planting and things like this. When it comes to the bare open areas, sometimes you can actually let it regenerate by itself to reach to a stage where then your implementation practices can then come in place later on when it has a bit of tree cover, because not all trees can go in the bright open sun, especially our tropical trees, because they don't regenerate that way. Yeah. Let's see. Use natural regeneration where possible. That's the cheapest method, right? Basically allowing natural regeneration to happen, but not all species can regenerate naturally. Some species, they can only spread close to about 30 meters from the parent tree, for example, the diplocarps. Plant species to maximize biodiversity, that's a given, and use resilient plant material, you know, trying to make use as much as possible that can face future kind of issues. Plan ahead for infrastructure, right? If you're going to be planting here, make sure you have long-term plans that you're not going to build a road through your project site or simple things like that. Learn by doing. It's all trial and error. Right now, everybody that is doing a lot of these works are coming from really the same level. We're all in the same boat, and basically make it pay. Have a mechanism that you can then generate from. You know, it can't just be a voluntary project for many people. Yeah. So the global biodiversity is very rigorous. It's site-based and it's transparent. There's 8 science-based biodiversity criteria. You do assessment on the field. To make it cheaper, we're doing it. We have regional hubs. So in Malaysia, TRCRC, we're a hub, and we have close to about 10 trained assessors at TRCRC, and basically to go and certify projects out there. And then more importantly is the mentoring. So not only you get the training and the certification, but also the mentoring is very, very important to assist and develop the capacity. So we want to move away from the paradigm shift. So plant any tree at the most minimal cost, you know, but move towards a more improved system in place to improve biodiversity, the resilience, assurance, and risk. You know, there's a lot of projects out there that catches on fire, that gets eaten up by pests and all of these kind of negative impacts. But what we're trying to do as much as possible is to minimize that by developing good practices. And measure and remeasure for getting your impacts. So this biodiversity standard covers most of these sort of impacts. It also supports the global biodiversity framework. So I'm not going to read everything, but it reduces the threat to biodiversity through all of these different criterions, and also more importantly, meeting people's needs, you know, so through sustainable and financing of communities. And also tools, so developing tools for mainstreaming some of these practices, which we'll be launching soon. More importantly, tree planting is not only just life on land, or restoration is just not only life on land, but it affects a whole range from, you know, poverty for creating jobs, zero hunger for creating edible crops, education from training the communities as well, and gender as well, from inclusion of a lot of different groups. So in TRCRC, actually, we have a majority of us in the group actually female that are working on this, and it's amazing to see some of the strides that we have, just to name a few. Yeah. So as mentioned, our partners come from a range of different backgrounds. We have the main lead is the Botanical Gardens Conservation International, based in Kew. We have Kew Gardens, which is the kind of like the British center for botanical garden. Yeah. World Agroforestry, Plant Vivo, who does a lot of carbon-related credits. We have 1t.org. We have different banks. We have Traffic also in there, and the Society of Ecological Restoration. And the hub partners are expanding. So we first started off with about 8 hub partners, and now we have a little bit more, about 16 or so across the region. Some in Jordan, some in Brazil, all over in the United States. Yeah, just to name a few. In Hong Kong as well. And we are starting up hubs practitioners in Indonesia and in the Philippines as well. And how it works, basically, you submit an online application, we carry out some remote sensing and data collecting data, and then you get a scoring against the different criterias, and then a verification is then sent over to the secretariat, and then you get a certification score. And with that certification score, you can then get mentoring and also gain expertise on how you want to reach your final target of basically your final restoration target. Yeah. And an example could lead from a range of different ecosystems. So we're not talking of just pure conservation. So this can work in habitat connectivity initiatives. It can work also on agricultural initiatives and plantations, and also agroforestry. So it's not necessarily tied down to pure conservation like we always see it, So we want to be as diverse as possible. And also, not just tropical forests. So it works for savannas, grasslands, it works for drylands, it works for boreal forests, wetlands, mangroves. And the key is basically measuring the differences from your start to your finish, and also measuring how your reference forest or reference ecosystem is going to be, right? And then you're scored against that. So it is not biased to like, okay, more biodiversity the better, but it's basically where you're starting from and where you're going, right? And therefore that's how you score, right? And yeah, this just showcased the differences from having those landscapes and the interventions that can be carried out from all of that. Yeah. The beauty of it is we're simplifying some of these methodologies. We're trying to make it as simple as possible so that everybody can follow. You do not have to be a plant expert to follow some of these key kind of attributes that you want to achieve. Yeah, and the assessments basically can come up from some of these are examples that we use. For example, classification of different stages, whether or not you have nearby forests where the trees can then come back, whether or not you have seed dispersal, whether there's regenerance in some of these areas, whether or not they're at fire risk of being wiped out, or any other flooding risk, for example, what sort of vegetation cover they start off with, and what kind of soil conditions. And all of that will drive kind of like your strategy and your plan when moving forward. Remote sensing biodiversity is emerging. There's a lot of really interesting tools. There's now certain competitions globally to look into kind of how you can screen for biodiversity within 24 hours and develop the most complete list of species in there. I'm not sure what the challenge is called, but it's now happening. So many now tech companies spending money on some of these technologies. And so we no longer have to do it manually. We do not have to go and all the time on the ground. What we can do is kind of reduce the cost. And I think if that once emerges, the cost of carrying out this will be reduced quite a lot. So hopefully we can do it more and more. Yeah. And it's very site specific. So this is, for example, one certain site in Perak, and looking at the different stages of the site, from what stage it starts off with, and at what kind of level you want to kind of regenerate some of these areas towards, right? So there's a lot of different variations, and there's a lot of different models depending on how you wish to carry out the exercise. Assessing social benefits is very important, so we need to basically involve the local partners in place. They're the ones who are going to be the direct beneficiaries of some of these initiatives. And in some of the projects that we work in, we can actually see a really great shift from different practices, from more extractive practices, for bringing guides in to kind of hunt and fish and all that kind of things, extracting woody materials, non-forest timber products, to more regenerative things. So we're trying our best to try and make this more a regenerative model for some of these communities, and trying to do it as simple as possible, so that even someone who has not is not able to read or write can be able to do this. Simplifying the manuals, pictures, before, after, that sort of matter. And also, if possible, educate as much as possible to be more literate. Yeah. So the manual is up for download. You can actually download it. You just look up the Global Biodiversity Standard website, and the manual is there. And the manual covers really a range of different areas. So it's got the application form, it's got where to start, how to start, obviously your introduction, remote sensing sites, field surveys, what you have to do on the field survey, assessment and verification, mentoring, so how you can receive mentoring, becoming an assessor, so if you actually want to go out and assess projects, and finally the last one is the conclusion. So it's all there, all available, free, online. If you want to get certified, please come out and contact me. We can help out with that. And in the appendixes, you have all sorts of different forms you can get on to know how to kind of carry out the assessment methodologies. So we try to make it as much more accessible as possible. Yeah? So this is basically all our funders from the years. So thank you all to all the various funders and support and the partners on the ground for making some of the work that we do possible. Yeah. Thank you very much. I think I have about how many more minutes? So questions or discussions, or yes, anything interesting? Yeah. Attention. So that's very hard. I mean, it's getting a lot of negative press. For example, trees planted. Like there's a couple of projects in Africa where basically trees were not even supposed to be there, and people were planting exotic species. A lot of times exotic timber species in areas that are not supposed to be planted, and that is getting a lot of negative effects, right? This program, we hope to publicize a little bit more. We hope to make it a bit more simpler, and all times communicate it as much as possible, that when you're planting a tree, you want to plant it with the correct methodologies in place. So it is still a little bit technical, but it's a lot more easier to do than consult an expert and develop your bespoke program for your area, right? So hopefully, I do not have the full answer for that. It's very hard. But we all have to do our part in kind of like educating more and more people, especially, in events like this, we can then educate people from outside of the field. It's very important to then have these conversations with people who do not necessarily have this as a day-to-day job. Yeah. Yeah. Hello. Yeah.
probably you touched on this earlier today, right? Almost said it a little bit, right? My own view still to this day is that training a big team of native Sabahans to do repeated weeding every 2 or 3 months would have been cheaper and better. Right? Do you have any sort of comments on that?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. You can obviously have a little bit more, how do you say, targeted approach, right? That's, I think the size of Singapore has been cleared from liberation thinning, climate cutting, from 2016 to 2020, the size of Singapore. And that's how much they're just applying some of these kind of like, go ahead and just blanket cut all your woody climbers and vines and things like this. So it's definitely, for the practitioner, a lot easier to just say like, right, this is the methodology, go out and do it. It's going to cost a lot more if you're going to kind of like map out different areas and develop different things. But this was back then. So this was back then when technology was not there. The technology is coming up a little more faster, where you can get a little bit more data with hand-flown drones and satellite imagery, where you can actually then prescribe different methodologies. So the line planting can probably work in a certain area and not necessarily need to work in areas that already have not much vines, for example. And definitely the local community is a very interesting angle that needs to be done. When I mentioned this, assist natural regeneration, I think that's also your key. Yeah, it's actually cheaper to get up to a certain point, and actually certain species are not even needed to be planted. You know, you can develop framework species approach. You can basically better patrol some of the areas so that the dispersers can also move and migrate into the areas and things like this. In one of our sites, and it needs to be kind of like developed with a very kind of critical kind of thinking, right? In one of the sites, we actually have palm oil growing there, right? But we actually did not fell them. We left them because they were not actually reproducing as much, that they were then taking over, so they're not invasive. And we left it because also it then became a exotic framework species, shall I say it. So what happened was then the pigs and the elephants came in, and they brought in with them more exotic fruits. I mean, more species from the other regions, and assisted in regenerating as well. So you need to kind of think a lot about that sort of matter. Unfortunately, when you're talking to practitioners who come from a very traditional restoration forestry kind of background, forestry has always been taught to plant trees in rows in 1 or 2 different species so that they can then extract them later on. So a lot of times it's because they want to extract them, right? So and even though it's using these practices for restoration, the unfortunate part is that it's using the practices that they know, right? So planting trees of a certain size at a certain cost, at the most smallest cost, even though they die after that. There's a lot of different issues that needs to be done, and here we need to basically try to change and shift away from that. And we can only do it by creating pilots so that people can come and see its success. And I think from our history and our practices, we saw that happening. Yeah. I think time is up. Do you have anything else to add to that? If there's no any other urgent questions, I can hang around for a little bit and take other questions. But I think I need to make an announcement. Please scan this for feedback on how I did. Is it on how I did? Oh, okay. On how I did. Okay. Thank you very much.